Thank you everyone for joining us today. Really excited to sit here with this esteemed panel as we talk about scaling smarter, not harder, harnessing automation to overcome scale challenges. And today we're going to embark on an exploration of the strategic utilization of automation when it comes to addressing the intricate challenges associated with scalability. Now, our distinguished panelists are all respective experts in their own fields. They're going to really try to illuminate their path towards operational excellence through the judicious application of automated solutions. And prepare yourselves to gain some valuable insights and actionable strategies as we navigate the intricacies of modern scalability. Now, you may have noticed me looking down at my phone and reading that opening, blurb. That's because I used automation to do it. It's not because I didn't feel like memorizing a few lines, but I want to really highlight today too, as we go through this experience, the intersection of the human element and the technology when we think of bringing automation to the forefront. And that's going to be a really, interesting undertone of the overall dialogue. So let's kick things off with some introductions. My name is Devin Noonan. I will be your moderator today. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Bedrock. Bedrock is a supplier management technology firm where we essentially automate supplier onboarding, automate risk and banking verification. We do supplier master data cleansing, and we also automate AP recovery audits for large enterprise organizations in the procurement and the accounts payable functions. Joining me today, if you guys don't mind giving a quick info as I go down the line here to my left, I have Florian Rohde. He is the managing partner at iProcess LLC.
Thanks, Devin. Is this microphone really working? I can use yours.
Yeah, lean in.
All right. So yes, as Devin said, I'm managing partner at iProcess Consulting. I'm a little bit of cross contributor to this conference because I'm from the automotive world. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, mostly around software. The most interesting for this panel, I spent 6 years at Tesla, from the first Tesla Model S to the mass production of Tesla Model 3. And I was responsible to sign off every single software release that leaves Tesla headquarters in Palo Alto, about 750 over 6 years. And obviously, we utilized a lot of automation to achieve that goal. So I will share a lot of insight about that and a little anecdote here and there as well.
Next up, we have Krishna Bhardwaj. He is the CEO at Vidyatech Software.
Thank you, Devin. So I'm Krishna, and I run Vidyatech Software LLC out of Seattle. We have two lines of business. One is content technology or learning technology, if you will, and cybersecurity. And we do a fair amount of automation in both. Cybersecurity automation is essentially workflow automation that we've done over the last, let's say, 6 or 7 years. But in learning technology, we've been automating stuff for 30 years in my previous incarnation in another company as well. I go back to very unautomated days when I learned my first language using punched cards, Fortran 4, 76, and then COBOL in 81 using coding sheets. So automation is of different kinds and spans. As Atul will tell you, there are still COBOL code running in 95% of a vertical that he addresses. So automation is of various kinds, and it's a business outcome that determines what you do. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna. And last but certainly not least, our keynote from this morning, Atul Apte. He is the founder and CEO at Adarza.
Thank you. Can you hear me? All right. Yeah, so you heard all about AI previously, but this panel is really about automation. A little bit louder? Okay. So today on this panel, I'm going to really fall back on my experience working for healthcare. Right? I work for one of the largest healthcare companies in the US, where scaling started at a very high place. So think about your starting point for scaling a system is with 80 million users. It's a whole different ball game when that's your starting point for scaling up. So hopefully I'll share some of the experiences on how automation helped and where it can be even better. Thank you.
Thank you, gents. So to kick things off, first question for Florian, actually. I want you to maybe talk us through some of the core pillars, right, of automation and some of those foundational steps that leaders should consider when trying to apply this to scalability for their organizations.
Yeah, so I think one of the most essential parts of automation is really how things work together. So when I talk with some of my clients these days, a lot of people ask me, what are the low-hanging fruits? Ideally, where can I throw some money and I get some immediate benefit out of it? And unfortunately, the answer is there's no one thing that you snap a finger and you're immediately from zero to Tesla, right? So it is a lot about integration, and it's a lot about building an automation really from end to end. What I see a lot is that people automating a part of a process, and they call it automated testing, for example. But from my point of view, it has to really start, for example, with a code commit. It should go through a build machine, unit test, component test, system test, vehicle test, all the way through, including the evaluation of all those results. Without any human interaction. And that is where automation really shines, is once you have an end-to-end version of that. And like this, you can accelerate all of this. Just to give you some numbers, usually a car company needs about 6 to 12 weeks to validate a software release. We brought that down at Tesla to 24 hours.
Impressive. Krishna?
No, good.
Yeah, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. So I'm going to take a contra view. Not all business processes in a real enterprise are completely automatable. There are two things that essentially drive that. One is the business case for it. Is there an ROI in automating the whole thing? The second thing that drives it is the feasibility, whether it's technical feasibility or operational feasibility in terms of whether the organization is ready for the change and willing for the change, or economic feasibility, what's the ROI, so on and so forth. So automation boundaries to me are a result of the combination of these two important factors.
Fantastic. And
You have to automate everything.
And
do it right.
well, and I think that brings up a good point, and it's the old adage of automation for automation's sake, right? And maybe this is something you can expand upon for us here, Atul, is, what are some of those, I guess, business outcomes, right, that we really want to think about and let guide our journey when we think about scalability and automation?
Yeah, no, perfectly a valid question, because see, we have a diverse perspective here, right? When you're automating something new, bringing a hyper automation to a new product like Tesla, you have a different strategy, you have a different problem space to work with. When you're trying to bring in automation into the legacy world, it's a whole different ballgame altogether, particularly when it comes to the operational impacts of automation. There are set practices, there are set processes in place, and automating that has a big impact on, I'll give an example. You're processing a transaction and you have an exception process. When a transaction fails in the automation workstream, you move it into a manual queue. Someone has to take a look at it, someone has to move it to its conclusion. That backlog, we call it a backlog, that backlog is monitored. There are people who are working on that backlog whose performance is measured every year. So you have real implications of how a company manages its manual backlog. Now imagine what happens when I bring in hyperautomation into that process. Okay? If everything is working fine and the number of errors are manageable, things look good. Something happens, something goes wrong in the end-to-end system, and all of a sudden the backlog is huge. This impacts the operational teams a lot. They're concerned. Their performance is measured on how quickly they clear the backlog. So when we think about hyperautomation, particularly in the sense of current and legacy systems, you need to take a view of the operational impacts, both in the happy path, everything is working fine, and also in the sad path where you have got problems and what its implications are. So it's really the value in hyperautomation is there, but you need to think through all of those.
Thank you. And I think, something that Krishna brought up before as well, when it comes to there is still, right, some human element, and you need to make a determination as to whether or not going right from zero to Tesla, as Florian said, is the right move. And I think that for most people in the room and watching today, they're likely somewhere in between on that journey, from completely manual processes and human intensive work to the Tesla model of we're pumping things out totally automated in 24 hours. So I'd love to understand your view for those people in that intermediary stage. What are some of those boundaries that come along with automation?
Let me just add one thing. Elon actually coined the phrases like humans are underrated after he tried to replace them with automation. So we also learned that not everything can and has to be automated. I'm mostly talking about taking the big load of what we call regression testing, where you just make sure that you didn't break anything you haven't considered. But the new topics and the brand new features and so on, we always ran that through human engineers as well. Not in 24 hours, obviously, but we basically take the 98% of the regression, backpack off their back so they can concentrate on the innovation of the things.
Yeah. So to answer your question, Devin, there may be automation boundaries set up in a way that a process is maybe fully automated. It may be partially automated, or it may merely be that it's a human process continues to be one, but with automated inputs that aid that process and automated outputs that consummate that process, so to say. I'll take an example of our product, which is a custom workflow, Dash Magic, where essentially what we are doing is automating the workflow for a data loss prevention system. And you are doing that for multiple DLPs, and DLP vendors don't talk to each other. So automating that using multiple data loss prevention pieces of software, what it does is it enables the users to come in through something as simple as email and kind of put their point forward and receive security messages in a language which is closer to English than what security likes to do. So I think there are many ways to slice the cat, and the appropriate way to slice it would depend on the business situation.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And something when I think about automation, I'd love to pass this one over to you, Atul, is the use of AI, right? And obviously, we just heard a fantastic keynote, so I don't want to beat the dead AI horse here. But with responsible AI, what are some of the big focal points that you see people emphasizing in enterprise organizations when it comes to creating better automation at scale?
That's a really good question, because think about we're talking about process automation and the human in the loop. The role of humans in an automated process is really elevated. Okay, so this is not about doing the same work and the same task as you were doing before. Your role is elevated now to use your knowledge about certain situations and letting the transactions flow. That is where AI is going to have a huge potential for scaling, right? So if I've got a workforce of 50 people and I have deployed them in this elevated role, now as the transactions begin to grow in volume, I have a couple of choices. One choice is to train more people, and that's not as easy as we think, because you really need to train them on knowledge and how to apply that knowledge. The other option is to look into AI as a mechanism where you bring that elevated decision making into the process. So it still doesn't take away the human in the loop, but it helps you scale. So it's a little bit nuanced approach there. It's not about I'm replacing everybody who's working. No, I'm scaling the system up. Now if I'm doing 1 million transactions a day, now I can approach this with a 2 million transaction workload. What does that do to your business? So I think that is the opportunity really, is using AI to scale up your business, to scale up the outcomes, and ultimately the performance of your business. It's not about replacing people.
And I think this raises a question too, just about like organization preparedness, right, and change management, because there's a lot of factors that come into play, especially when you're displacing some roles and responsibilities from the individual to a more technology-centric approach. So I'd love to get some perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to build on that a little bit where with the optimistic outlook, not like threatening people, but what cool stuff can we do? And I'll tell you a little story about that. So everybody knows by now, I think, that Tesla cars have a trunk in the front. They call it the frunk. And at one point, a colleague of mine and I, we were thinking, how often do people use that frunk? And we looked at the data because, those cars are collecting a lot of information. So we looked at the data, and it turns out that people open this frunk in the first 3 months every day and then never again. Tesla driver of 5 years myself, I agree, that's true. Why? Because in the first 3 months, you show it to your friends, to your neighbors, to your family. And after that, you realize you don't even need that frunk. So you only have your tire kit and your charger, the mobile charger in there, and you keep that closed for forever. So it turned out that this latch that holds the trunk closed was designed for give or take 10,000 cycles. Based on the information we collected, we could redesign it factor 10, and we saved $10 per car just based on initiative. $10 per car is ginormous. I mean, you discuss cents per car usually. So this was a friend of mine and myself coming up with a hunch. So now look at AI and say, look, I feed you the requirements, I feed you my specifications. Here's how the people really use your product. And like go through the data, which is exabytes of data, and see if I over-designed my system. Because usually in our industry, you only learn if you under-designed your system. If something breaks, you never learn that you over-designed. So there's a huge opportunity out there.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you guys did a good job of letting your team, right, take the lead and the initiative, but then using AI and data and automation to help validate, right, these findings and hypotheses. So, when you think of rolling that out for a large organization, Tesla is a great model of someone that's done it well. What are some of those things that you need to do to really set the foundation from a change management perspective?
So I'm a big avid fighter for power to the engineers because those tools and those implementations, they should be driven by the engineers who use them. And you should not handcuff them to a certain tool if that doesn't help them. So I was always giving the responsibility of choosing the right tools, AI or non-AI, to the people who actually use them. And don't force them to use the same as people around them just to obey certain interfaces, tool interfaces. So if you want to use Python for your test automation, feel free to do so, but you have to report in a JSON format. And if somebody else uses COBOL, I don't know if COBOL can report in a JSON format, but you can do so too.
Excellent.
Very quickly, I think that's a great point, because in context of change management, it's about how you empower the workforce. Okay, it's not about dictating, this is the new state, this is how things are going to be, get ready and get trained and do the work. It's partly that, but I think there is an equal amount of empowerment that needs to be made if you're going to be successful on change management, AI or not. And with hyper automation, that empowerment needs to be looked into, because if it's a matter of simply rolling out new technology and expecting the workforce to scale up, I think it's going to be a disappointing result in many cases.
Let me build on a couple of things that he said. See, when you do data loss prevention, you as an organization have policies that nobody is allowed to violate. What happens is that if you don't want to handle any transactions, you say, let the alerts happen. What does it matter? I'm not allowing people to violate the data anyway, violate the data policies anyway. What happens, unfortunately, is that users, if they find the security guys unreasonable, they're going to find a way around. So I remember a guy who had to desperately send mergers and acquisitions process was going on. He had to send financial data. He was not allowed to send it. I remember what he did was he printed everything, took pictures of it and sent it by WhatsApp. So if you don't set up a system where you are handling incidents, and what Dash Magic does is through automation, it quadruples the number of incidents you can handle. It also almost quadruples the number of incident responders because most of the incidents are being handled by or average users. But in most organizations, only security team is involved in handling it. And then when AI comes in, ML comes in, you identify amongst the incidents how many are false positives, because that's one big issue in cybersecurity. Is this really a violation or is it a false positive? Of course, false negatives, if they happen, that means you really didn't build the software right, which really means that there was a violation and you didn't catch it. That's your black hole. So that's one thing I wanted to say about AI and ML.
Oh, I appreciate that. And we're talking a lot about some of these applications and hearing some good stories here, but something we haven't dove super deep into yet are just some of the inherent risks that come along with rolling out automation at mass. So I'll open it up to any of you that maybe want to talk a little bit about the risks that are associated with, implementing things like AI, machine learning, and other automation technology.
So I think the answer, and this is just my view on it, it depends partly on the industry that you are in, right? So some industries are heavily regulated than others. And that regulation needs to be in place and enforced regardless of the scale. So you might be, scaling up 10, 20 times doesn't mean your compliance needs, go down. They are there all the time. So one of the risks in hyperautomation that I have experienced is not having sufficient views on how to stay compliant when you increase the scale and the speed at which transactions are processed. And that can lead to back to the backlog, right? That can lead to some unintended consequences of having a heavy backlog. So one of the risks is making sure that you stay compliant as you scale up. The other thing is when you scale things up, everything goes up, good and the bad. Okay, you can't expect only the good side to go up and the bad side to stay where it is. There is a good chance that the entire good and bad and the positive and negatives will all go up. So you need to have the right capability and the capacity to operate on a higher scale. So I being in technology and IT, we sometimes do not have enough visibility into the operational realities of the company, right? All we get is here's the set of requirements, we need a solution, and we are all excited and we build a hyper automated solution. We need visibility into the operational aspects because those are the points in which either the hyper automation succeeds or fails. So that is the risk that we need to look into.
Thank you. Yeah, just to jump in on that topic, and as I mentioned earlier, you need to paint a big picture, right? So I had some interesting consulting events where I was working with an oil drilling company out of all options, and they released a new software like every 30 days, and they were asking me, hey, shall we do continuous integration? So for one code change per month? Probably not, right? So you also should not urgently hyper automate your test systems. So the same thing is the other way around, what we call clogging the pipeline. If you hyper automate your funnel that goes into your development and through your development, but you cannot test fast enough, it doesn't help you either to automate everything on one side, and you cannot consume fast enough. So you have to see the big picture, and it has to fit together so that all parts of automation actually fall together and provide a consistent outcome. Else you will clog your system. And I think that's pretty much exactly what you just meant, right?
You made the point perfectly, because that end-to-end picture is the key. And we don't always have the visibility that we need. So you do run the risk of implementing something without having the big picture. Great point.
And I think I hear a couple of challenges with that, right? I think one, it's really coming from the top down, where you need strong leadership that is behind this change management, program, and that is also leaning in to the data that you're getting from the ground level up. So that intersection, right, I think is super critical to success. And I'd love to, maybe hear a bit about how do you really set that stage from the leadership down to successfully execute on these really, massive initiatives.
Yeah, just one thought on that. It's very interesting. In the automotive world, the leadership is usually mechanical engineers, and there's and they're eager to do something, but they don't have the fundamental understanding of how software works. So this is where I spend actually a lot of time to talk to really C-level executives and explain them that software can be changed in a matter of seconds. It can be redone if it didn't work. So it's very, very different. So. There's a lot of education we also have to do on the leadership. It's one thing is that they are ready for change, but the other thing is they also have to change themselves a little bit.
Let me pick up also on the point you made. Uh, Done right, I think automation leads to more compliance, more auditability, and more evidence for what you've done. So we've seen, for example, that when the amount of time it took for them to get audited used to be huge, because the audit team would come and say, hey, bring us why you handle this exception in this following manner. These are banks, and the audit and compliance is just key to them. Now there are chief fraud officers and so on in the banks in many places. So we found that automatic record keeping, automatic data collection, automatic reporting, and automatic exception handling routines actually increase the consistency and auditability and compliance massively by an order of magnitude.
No, fantastic point. That reminds me of something. Thanks for for that, because this is where I experienced the when it comes to compliance and auditability. As you introduce hyper automation, you have to keep up with the practices that are already in place, right? You have got to refine those practices so that you give it some time. First of all, on day one of introducing a hyper automated system, you're not going to get everything right. Even if the technology is perfect, the process needs some time to adjust. There is an adjustment period when you scale things up. And part of, that's an excellent point about, audits and compliance, that people have to start absorbing what the outcomes are in a hyper automated system. And they will eventually, given some time, they will accept it because they will see the reality. The reality is that you are now being more compliant, and you need to change your audit practices a little bit. So that adjustment time, give it sufficient time, and people will catch up.
So this is a fantastic point. In the car world, you have to get certain certifications, and that sometimes take time. And with the pace we started to implement, people started to question if that's even possible. And we actually found an interesting solution for that. Instead of having our product certified every time we changed it, we actually certified our test process and our automation, so that the EPA in this case said, okay, every time you run through this certified process, you are allowed basically to self-certify. And that was a huge step. And given the fact that more and more like things go over the air with updates and so on, that also changed the behavior of certain products. There's no way that the officials actually can certify all of that like 24/7. So that was a very interesting approach, and we pioneered that approach.
And I think that double downs on Atul's point about, the regulatory concerns in specific, industries is really going to guide some of the, automation initiatives that you're able to roll out at scale, and oftentimes, can hinder some of those automation efforts as well. And while we're, talking about, some of the technology and things behind the scenes here too, are there any tools or technologies that you have either implemented personally or that you would even recommend to the audience that you think are really game changers when it comes to scaling up an organization?
Yeah, so there are a very large number of tools in the marketplace, but given that we are software developers, we've used Selenium for robotic process automation, and we've used Microsoft. We're a Microsoft shop at one level because Microsoft is a client of ours. I operate from Redmond as well. my office is there. So in terms of workflow automation, we've used .NET. In terms of chatbots and virtual assistants and stuff like that, we use the Copilot. That works very very nicely for us. In terms of ML and AI, we haven't even used Azure ML, but instead we've used some appropriate open source libraries that work for us very nicely. And then for data integration and ETL, which is essentially extract, transform, and load, we've used C sharp, so written our own code in order to do that. That is essentially the list of things that we've used.
Yeah, I think those kind of decision-making, items about technology, products, depend a little bit on what your starting point is. So if your starting point is 80 million members, you've got to pick a technology that will scale up from 80 million to probably 100, 120 million. Okay, so that is one of the factors that goes into which tools are appropriate for the processes and the scale that you want to automate. So some part of it, I would say, is a fit for purpose kind of thinking. There's no shortage of technologies, like you said, and products. You can evaluate robotic automation. We have done that. We have literally tried every way of automating a administrative process. And that's very different from what you would do in a Tesla environment, right? So different technologies, different products, make sure it's fit for purpose. I think that is the key. The other thing to keep in mind is with robotic automation, you're still dealing with a mix of legacy systems and new systems. Okay, so setting the expectation about what you can achieve in this kind of a hybrid environment, you can expect only so much to automate a legacy system, particularly systems that you don't have access to, right? You're depending on third-party systems. There's only so much you can do to automate. I'll tell you an example without giving names, but healthcare data. There is both a public healthcare data. There is healthcare data that the government gives you access to if you have got the right rights and privileges. And then you have got private data. So there are certain use cases where you need an amalgamation of all of that. So if you're going to hyper-automate a process that uses some API, a third-party API, without knowledge of whether that API's infrastructure can handle your hyper-automation, this is a recipe for disaster. And with experience, I can tell you, we were gung-ho about a hyper-automated system that could process things like this until we hit an external API. And somehow we got a phone call saying, what are you guys doing? Okay. Why are you pinging our APIs like a million times in a 24-hour period? Well, we have 80 million members, so we've got to process. This is what we're doing. No. Okay, you've got to look at the end-to-end scale and the capacity and set the right technology, products, and infrastructure to be successful. So yeah, it's interesting problem.
And I think you bring up a good point there too about, right, internal and external stakeholders. So, you can oftentimes be in a bit of that vacuum when you're building these new automations and these products. But at the end of the day, you need to think of the impact it has, whether it is for your internal team, whether it is with partners, clients, et cetera. And from there, it's really going to help to guide your, journey on that automation process.
So I just add, I don't have such a nice list as Krishna has with the tools, and they probably changed by now. But it is, as I mentioned earlier, it's all about the integration. And a rather funny example for that is, so Elon Musk tends to announce his, features and functionalities on Twitter or X. So that was one of the most important integration at Tesla we had. We integrated Elon's Twitter feed into our Slack channel. So we actually got the information as soon as the rest of the world got information about new requirements.
Arguably the most critical automation that we will discuss today. So, Just to bring it home, and then we'll kind of open it up to some Q&A for the audience here as well in the last 10 minutes. I want to take a lens from my perspective too at Bedrock, where we do a ton of automation externally for our clients. When we think of automating supplier onboarding and having APIs to government agencies worldwide to do real-time risk verification, but internally, my role and responsibility as the Chief Revenue Officer is to grow the company. So when we talk about scale from that lens, my major focus is client acquisition, building out the team, automating, and digitizing as much of that experience as humanly possible, really adopting that RevOps model. And there have been some fantastic tools. I think of things like Gong for conversation intelligence, where quite literally, it takes notes. It can draft my recap emails if I want. There's the Gen AI behind it, where you can search any email, call, all on one singular thread. So the advances there to really clone yourself and get more efficient and effective are out there. And there are cost-effective solutions. But I think the panel's really brought up some good points here too, where it's not, putting everyone right in a similar bucket in every particular instance. It's considering those business outcomes that you're looking for and really starting there as that critical first step on your automation journey at the end of the day.
So the fun thing is that in Silicon Valley, people literally leave the company if they don't like the tool. I've seen it. And they just go next door where the tool is better. That's it.
And I think it's why you see a revolving door in a lot of these larger organizations with the CTO role and some
It's
of
one
those,
in the front and one in
because
the
they
rear.
come
Yeah.
in and, oh, well, I actually come from an SAP shop, so I'm going to roll that out now. And 3 years later, it's still not working. You're still having headaches. And then someone comes in, well, I'm an Oracle shop. So it's just the vicious cycle that you see on that front.